Hi, I'm Matt Reed. Good morning. I'm the CEO of the Aga Khan Foundation here in the UK, and it is my great pleasure to welcome all of you to Pluralism in Architecture, a partnership between Maki Associates and the Aga Khan Development Network. We have with us today Gary Kamemoto, who is a partner at Maki and Associates, coming to us from Tokyo, as well as Victoria Jessen Pike, who was for the duration of the project, the client-side architect, so the architect for AKDN, helping oversee things with Gary here in London. And I think you're in for a very good conversation. We've invited you here today as part of Open House, the Open House London Festival, in 2020. Now, in normal times, we also would have tried to have you over to the building. In previous years, we've had as many as 1,000 people come to the building over the course of a weekend. Unfortunately, we can't do that this year. So what we wanted to do was somehow invite you in virtually to spend some time with Gary and Victoria and get a sense of this building and the 16-year partnership between Maki and Associates and His Highness the Aga Khan and the Aga Khan Development Network. The Aga Khan Centre is actually the third of 3 buildings. And so Gary and Victoria will talk about the other 2 buildings, one in Ottawa, one in Toronto, and then the third one here in London. I'm actually speaking to you from the Aga Khan Centre. I was able to come in today. I thought that would be fitting and appropriate. And I have to say, for those of us who live and work here, it's an extraordinary place, and we're incredibly grateful to Maki and Associates for having done what we think is a wonderful job. And I think as you listen to the discussion today, you'll get a sense of why we're so proud to be here and happy to be here, actually. The building, the Aga Khan Centre, houses 3 Aga Khan institutions who've been in London for over 40 years, but never had a permanent home until 2 years ago when we moved in to this building. The Aga Khan Foundation, which I represent, the Aga Khan University's Institute for the Study of Muslim Civilizations, and the Institute for Ismaili Studies. And so all told, we have about 300 people in normal times using the building on any given day. That includes students, faculty, researchers, staff, all using the building in a variety of ways. And again, Gary and Victoria will talk a little bit about some of the challenges that they faced when they were trying to design a building that would convey a number of messages and at the same time respond to the needs of its users. And I have to say they've done an excellent job. We're very, very happy with it. I mean, as I mentioned, the public response to the building and the interest in the institutions has really been extremely gratifying and surprising for organizations like us that didn't have a home before. We've had over 9,000 people visit the building and tours. We've had a very active events program bringing in international conferences and other activities, exhibitions, etc. Things that frankly we were never able to do in London, or not able to do as well as we were in this building. And so we actually see the building as a critical ingredient, bringing our 3 organizations together and allowing us to fulfill our missions in I would say, a more expanded ways. One of the key features of all 3 institutions is our dedication to the concept of pluralism, that notion of respecting all traditions and cultures, the diversity within those traditions and cultures, and certainly for the Aga Khan Foundation of working with everyone wherever we happen to be present. And it was that spirit of pluralism and engagement that His Highness wanted to see expressed in the fabric of the building. And so I think you will be taken on that journey with Gary and Victoria shortly. I think it's fitting that Victoria will be moderating this, since she was the client-side architect for us, and the building really was in her hands, or we rather, the needs from our side were in her hands, and so we feel like we're in very good company today. So Victoria, I'm going to hand it over to you, and I just want to thank everybody for joining us this morning.
Great, thank you very much, Matt. So my name is Victoria, as Matt said, and it has been an incredible privilege and honor to work for His Highness the Aga Khan and the Aga Khan Development Network since 2011. And as Matt said, my role was, as on the client side, working between all of our stakeholders, all of our end users, and working with Maki Associates and with the very large design team to really build both through all the ideals of the project and all the principles, and to fulfill the vision, and also to make sure that we ended up with a really functional building that was going to really last for a very long time. And you'll hear more from Gary about how that's been achieved. And as Matt said, I think I've been also following up a lot with all the people who are using the building now, and it's been incredibly important and fundamentally improving the way all the scholars, students and staff work together. And I think, and it's really fulfilled in every aspect, everything we set out to do. So it couldn't have been more exciting. We set out on this journey in around 2011. Actually, I got involved when there was the architect selection process. And on the appointment of Maki Associates, we realized that this was going to be the first building designed by a Japanese architect in London, the first permanent building. So that's also a really exciting gain for London in architectural terms. So I think that, again, as Matt said, a lot of people have been through the building for lots of reasons, and the quality of the architecture and the special and the Japanese sensibility of this architecture is something I think that is very unique in London. I'm going to introduce Gary a little further. As I said, it's been a great pleasure to work with Gary, and I think we're now friends for life. And Gary, of course, has been working most of his career Maki and Associates, established by Professor Fumihiko Maki in 1965. And Fumihiko Maki is a world-renowned architect. He was awarded the Pritzker Prize in 1993, which is the architecture community's most lauded architecture prize. And what is, as Gary let us know the other day, what is absolutely incredible, at the age of 93, Professor Maki is still working, and it's just a joy for all of us to hear. That's incredible. Gary is responsible for the firm's international projects. So with the exception of the last 6 months, Gary has been flying around the world, nurturing all these projects, including these 3 Aga Khan projects. And some of the other projects to name, seminal projects, that Gary has been responsible for include the new MIT building for Harvard, which was completed in 2010, and the new Tower 4 at the World Trade Center in New York. So it's a great pleasure, as I said, to introduce Gary. So without further ado, I would like to hand over to Gary, and we will get back to the discussion later. Thank you.
So the title of our talk today, Pluralism and Architecture, I thought that it would be apt to begin with the statements from His Highness about pluralism. And although this is a talk about design and architecture, I thought it was important to set the stage by some important ideas about pluralism, which His Highness has been talking about. So I read that His Highness says that pluralism is a process and not a product. It is a mentality, a way of looking at a diverse and changing world. In this perspective, diversity is not a burden to be endured, but an opportunity to be welcomed. In a world where cultures increasingly interpenetrate one another, a more confident and a more generous outlook is needed. What this means, perhaps, above all else, is the readiness to participate in a true dialogue with diversity, not only in our personal relationships, but in institutional and international relationships also. That takes work and it takes patience. Above all, it implies a readiness to listen. A pluralist, cosmopolitan society actively seeks to understand it and to learn from it. A cosmopolitan society regards as distinctive threads of our particular identities as elements that bring beauty to a larger social fabric. I think it's these thoughts that we try to express in the buildings themselves, and hopefully by the end of our talk today that you might be able to see how some of these thoughts has been reflected into the architecture through an incredible process. So this is going to involve, in our office, we've been calling these three projects the trilogy, and they are of different programs, different locations: the Delegation building in Ottawa, the Aga Khan Museum in Toronto, and the Aga Khan Centre in London. And they are all distinctive different building types. Although they were independent, for us, this was a 16-year journey. And as you can see on the timeline down below, there seems to be a continuous kind of evolution of thought and ideas that cross and develop from project to project. So although they're distinctive, you might be able to see the crossover of some of the ideas that have influenced each of the projects. What was fascinating was that, as Victoria had mentioned, we're based in Tokyo, and as we started our practice back in 1965, our work is primarily based in Japan, and we are based in Tokyo. So a lot of the work is very singular, very homogeneous. Our projects in Japan, working with Japanese. However, these projects offered an incredible opportunity. When I've counted, there are people, company, individuals from 21 different nations that were involved in these three Aga Khan projects. And I wish to thank in some of our listeners today who might be listening that have participated in this journey. You can see that there are a number of companies from different parts of the world who has collaborated and brought these buildings to fruition. And it's not a singular mind that creates these buildings. It is this kind of process where people from different regions, different backgrounds, different expertise contribute to the cause in which these buildings were put together. So the first project, I will bring you to Ottawa. And this project started back in 2002 on an incredible site facing the Ottawa River. And it faces the ceremonial route called the Confederation Boulevard, which is the mile of history where all of the important buildings, including Parliament Hill, belong on Confederation Boulevard. And this was the last site on that ceremonial route that the Delegation building embarked. What was unusual in our collaboration with His Highness was typically as architects, you would probably get a telephone book thick brief specifying all the requirements of the project. But in every single endeavor that we have had with His Highness, we receive actually a vision statement, which is almost like a piece of poetry. And I would always keep this letter on my desk through the duration of the project and continue to read and reread it to understand and to cross-check the design to see if we're heading in the right direction. And this is an excerpt of the first letter we received in what the Delegation building aspired to achieve. And His Highness says, in a rock crystal, the cuts and angles permit both transparency as well as translucency. It pleases and confuses the eye by its internal planes running at different angles, creating a sense of visual mystery. The delegation building, in a sense, should be somewhat mysterious and visually esoteric. It should not be blatant, but ethereal, not obvious, but difficult to captivate. The goal is to create a building which causes the viewer to wonder how different elements and different planes relate to each other, how they work together to tickle the eye. The design should consider the use of structural system of glass, steel, aluminum to create an extraordinary visual inquiry. When we first received this, we really couldn't figure out how to make a building out of this. And it was through quite a bit of study and exploration that that was required, and a lot of back and forth within the stakeholders and with His Highness to arrive at a probable building. Here you can see the site, which faces the beautiful river. It's a very irregular shape, and it also has a level difference of 3.5 meters. And how to kind of create and manifest that idea, although we were giving a carte blanche in the design, there was also an aspiration to kind of interpret and bring kind of a Islamic modern spirit to the building as well. And I think our first insight when understanding the context was that we thought that maybe kind of the spatial spirit that a lot of buildings in the Muslim world have is to create kind of an inner cosmos, kind of its own world. And this was the first sketch we've made of having maybe a very simple building form and what we were calling an inner sanctuary. And some of the references that we all know from the Muslim world, on the left, you see the Wikala of Al Ghori in Cairo, which is centers around a central courtyard, completely secluded from the hustle and bustle of the exterior world. And the bottom ground floor of the courtyard is where nomadic people come together to trade, to interact, and then up above, you will have apartments and hotels where they would stay. And a space like that, together with what we thought perhaps a beautiful landscape courtyard, such as the Court of Lions in Alhambra, perhaps we thought could create this kind of inner cosmos within the site. So we immediately translated this concept into what in our office, what we call a sketch model. And when you talk about sketches, it's always on paper, but we do this three-dimensionally. And this was one of the earlier models of trying to capture that idea of a rock crystal together with the concept of an inner sanctuary, of having something very special at the inner core, which is hidden from the outside. And that particular rock crystal, we thought, could be created through a series of layers, starting with an outer form, which kind of translates into a sequence and series of different architectural layered elements, starting with the glazing to follow the form of the crystal, and an inner shroud, which is almost like a kind of a hanging element between the space and the glass, and an inner screen, which also adds to that composition. So there is a series of 7 layers that we began to investigate, which translated again into kind of a tectonic drawing and model of how those different layers might be able to create that kind of experience that was expressed in the vision statements. Here you can see the outer form, which is glazed, and then the inner shroud and kind of a lattice screen on the inside, all seemingly kind of hanging within this glass enclosure. And that was converted into a more specific study model. And this was our kind of architectural version of the rock crystal. And when we presented this to His Highness, he asked us, will the actual building look as good as the model? And we had promised him it would be better. And that was a kind of a big pressure placed on our collective team to see how this particular image can be translated into architecture. So with that glazed atrium, together with that was paired a courtyard, which was modeled in same proportions as the Court of Lions at Alhambra. It's a double square, 16 by 32. So together with that garden and the crystal, that created the kind of heart of the building, which was the inner sanctuary. From the outside, as per the sketch, it's a very simple building form. It's cladded in a material called neuroparie, which came from Japan. And we akin that to an artificial rock crystal. This material called neuroparie is actually created by glass beads, and that is made into a molten and hardened to create this kind of crystallized glass material. And that clads the entire building on the outside. And perched behind it, you see the kind of crystal, which kind of arouses this curiosity perching out from the outer form. When you get on into the inside of the building, a completely different world begins to unfold. So here you can see the different layers of the glass and the shrouded screen. And this shroud that you see in white up above is actually created with glass fiber textile. And this too we brought from Japan. It wasn't actually a building material. This was devised for asphalt reinforcement. And it had a beautiful property of glowing. The light actually gets into the fiber. So we thought that it would be magnificent to actually create a shroud out of it. And as you can see in this photograph, the ceiling just glows and the entire atrium is kind of like a sundial as the sun moves around the interior of the space. On the walls is actually a aluminum screen, and this was actually inspired by the traditional jali that you see in Muslim architecture, which often, in the old days, the traditional jali was actually carved stone. In our case, we've actually made this out of cast aluminum. And there was quite a bit of search done on how to do this, and actually a foundry who actually makes automotive parts was actually found in the outskirts of Toronto. And you see some of the images of how this modern interpretation of the jali was actually made out of cast aluminum, just seemingly hangs from the glass up above. The magic of this is the interplay with the light. And when the sun hits it, you actually get a four-dimensional architecture, which is the light and shadow that is cast from the screen on this surrounding architecture on the floors and on the walls. And from the atrium, you see the courtyard, which is kind of the inner garden, which you discover once you get into the building. But one of the challenges, as some of our audience might know, Ottawa tends to be very cold, and maybe 3 months out of the year, there's heavy snow. And a lot of the garden types in the Muslim world are in warm, hot regions. And a lot of the planting is actually flush in the floor because the irrigation for the planting. And in our case in Ottawa, knowing that it snows, we actually reversed the mechanism of the planting and actually created raised planter beds. And that was in response to actually the cold climate where we get the snow. And this is a view of what happens in the snowy months where we have the snow collect on the planters to create, as far as I know, since we finished this 12 years ago, this may be the only Islamic garden using snow as a natural landscape feature. And it's a very unusual view because we actually put heaters in the floor. So all the snow melts away and drains into the center of this garden. And we have a series of snow mounds. And this was actually inspired by one of our collaborators in Toronto who told me that snow is actually very beautiful if you don't walk on it. And actually that proved to be true, I think, in this image. And finally, this is an aerial view of the building at night, of the crystal within the mile of history. Our second project brings us to Toronto, and this opportunity came concurrent during the time when we were still designing the Delegation building, which was just presented. And this is somewhat away from the city on a 7-hectare site. And when we found the site, a colleague of ours, Charles Correa, was in the process of already designing the Ismaili Center for His Highness on a portion of the site, which is the circular drum that you see in this photograph. And that was on the lowest part of the site. And there was also an existing office building on this 7-hectare property. And the mission that was tasked to us was to design the Aga Khan Museum on this site. And before we embarked on the exercise, we suggested to His Highness that perhaps a master plan for the site is needed to create some organization and relationship between the museum and the Ismaili Center that was being designed at the time. So before embarking on the design for the museum, we ended up taking on a master planning exercise of how to organize the site. And our idea for the site was that we felt that the centerpiece should be maybe a formal garden, an Islamic garden, where the buildings were subservient to that, and the garden will help organize the two buildings. One was secular and one was holy. And there should be a kind of a unique relationship on either side of the garden. So you see our concept model here, where again, on this irregular kind of contoured site, the center of the entire composition is a formal garden. And on the left is Mr. Correa's Ismaili Center with the prayer hall facing Mecca. And to the right is flanked a kind of building form which represented the museum at that time, which, like the Delegation building, had an inner courtyard framing a view, we thought, to the prayer hall. Our actually inspiration for this came from this project in Samarkand, and this is the Registan Square, which is a beautiful urban space which organizes these three pieces. And when we measured this, the square in between the two front buildings was 80 meters square. And although I think the form and scale of the buildings in Toronto were different, the square actually has a certain power to organize the architecture. So we thought that would be a very apt, probably, concept for this complex. And we immediately translated that into a plan. So you see that the centerpiece for the entire project becomes a formal garden, and to either side are the buildings. You see here that the prayer hall on the left, in the shape of a circular drum, is oriented toward Mecca. And then the museum on the right has an inner courtyard with a framed view subservient to the prayer hall, framing a view of that. So that was a kind of a very unique kind of visual relationship that was created around a formal garden. So as we were embarking on this exercise to organize the site, again, His Highness wrote us a letter mentioning that maybe the museum should be organized around the notion of light that has traversed almost all of human history and has been an inspiration for numerous human faiths. Decades of human history are referred to as enlightenment for good reason. The goal would be to capture the day and night sources of light to create a sense of iridescence, reflectivity, and a glow, and to use various manifestations of that light. The combination of such properties will always have a thrilling sense of quality and design and visual interest. I hope that the building and the spaces around it will be seen as a celebration of light and the mysteries of light that nature and the human soul illustrate to us at every moment of our lives. This concept, of course, is particularly validated in Islamic texts and sciences. So this has inspired us to come up with a building form, again, very, very simple, but it's faceted on the outside, clad in perhaps the whitest granite that we could find. And it's a Brazilian white granite. And with this faceted angular profile, it catches the sun as it moves around the building. And when one walks into the museum, the ground floor is organized as a cultural forum with a square courtyard in the center, which becomes kind of a center of activity where people can freely come in, perambulate, and enjoy the space, which organized around exhibitions, and actually a 500-seat theater to showcase music and performances from Islamic culture that is not so well known, and a workshop. So like the Delegation building, as one comes into the building, there's a cubic square courtyard, which actually brings light into the space, serving kind of like a sundial. And the glass around the courtyard is actually ceramic fritted with a negative and positive. And as the light comes through it, it creates a third pattern on the solid portion of the glass. And it creates this kind of effect that the traditional jali creates, as you can see in this image from the Red Fort. And throughout the day, as the sun, the source of light within the building comes through the glass, patterns of light and shade move around the central courtyard, giving kind of a spectacular kind of symphony of light and shade. Another view of that. And within the central space, which one can perambulate, we've kind of akin this to a Muslim street scene. And in this case, on the top left is an image from Cairo. And in many of these towns, there's a bay window called the Musharabiyah, which is a lattice screen, oftentimes carved in wood, in which you look down onto the street. So the public space within the museum was kind of thought of as a street. And we have these 4 musharabiyahs created in cast zinc. And as you can see, we have 4 of these screens, each one of them 4,000 pieces, which were all kind of handmade. And you see this on the 2nd floor. And when you are in the gallery space, you can look down onto the street through the musharabiyah, giving this kind of modern sense of this traditional Islamic piece. And within the galleries, we thought that how can we bring this kind of unique quality of light into the galleries? And you see this light monitor that we have in the galleries, bringing in kind of dappled light. And that precedence, you would find these in many of the mosques in the Muslim world. And in this case, this reference from the Sheikh Lutfallah Mosque, in the clear story, there are these very tiny small apertures in which dappled light filters through. And we did this out of honeycomb aluminum, where we have these small perforated kind of openings, bringing in this filtered light into the gallery, creating this a very unique ambiance. And the final space in the building, which is the theater, is inspired from this faceted dome from one of the oldest bazaars in the Islamic world, and this one is from Iran, and you can see that this spectacular light coming through the dome and through its facets. You get this kind of interplay of light and shadow, and the roof of the theater takes on this form. And finally, this is the final composition of the 2 pieces around the central formal garden, and kind of creating kind of a new kind of a cultural center around gardens in the outskirts of Toronto. Our last project brings us to London in a completely different context. And the 2 former projects were more kind of in a suburban setting. This project was at the center of King's Cross in a very kind of high density development, which was at the time the biggest redevelopment project in Europe, and you see the extent of the entire redevelopment. The Aga Khan Development Network acquired a central property in a very kind of high-profile area of the development, facing 2 spectacular urban spaces, the Cubic Square and Cubic Park, which was the kind of a centerpiece of the entire development. And in this project, because the context was quite different, His Highness wrote to us stating that the roofscapes would be a distinctive creation of the architecture and will be at elevations which should give them excellent views over the surrounding areas of London. If all the green spaces are relatively small, relatively secret, and can be physically contained, then the overall approach gives us an opportunity to create a sense of seclusion, environmental privilege, and contained beauty. both the Islamic garden in itself and the pluralism of gardens within the Ummah are features that are practically unknown in London about the cultures of Islam. It might be worthwhile to consider that each green space should correspond to a particular cultural landscape of a given country or region in the Ummah. The total complex of spaces could be known as the Islamic Gardens of London. So this was a completely different theme in a different context. And what brought us to, it reminded us through our research, at this time, we had done about a 10-year research for the two projects, and we had become quite familiar with various projects in the Muslim world. And this one in Isfahan, which at the time the Sheikh created kind of a new urban city in this location in Iran, was centered around a very large square of mixed-use activities, from offices to shops to schools. And we sort of thought that the Cubitt Square and Cubitt Park kind of reminded us as a big kind of urban organizer for the high density development. And in the case of Isfahan, the big mosque that you see on the bottom has a series of sub courtyards around that. And we came upon this concept of a ribbon pathway having a series of smaller courtyards of different size and scale around this very large urban center. And we created kind of this diagram thinking that maybe a series of these gardens that His Highness talks about can be organized in a ribbon pathway. For the project itself, we were inspired by this project in Morocco, which is one of, I believe, the oldest academic formal institutions actually in the world, dating back to 1565. And this building type is called the madrasa, which is kind of a center for education. And what was fascinating was that, as you can see in the plan, a series of classrooms, of which there are 130, are organized around smaller courtyards. And those 7 clusters of classrooms and courtyards are all organized around a central patio. And this to us, it was that kind of series of courtyards that we thought can kind of create this kind of unique environment for education. However, because the site was very dense, we had to kind of unfold this vertically. So the concept was to have a series of 6 courtyards related to the classrooms, to a library, to offices, and obviously on the top, a very unique set of spaces reaching toward the sky, all kind of chiseled out of kind of a cubic stone form. So this was a very early concept model of kind of chiseling out these gardens in a very kind of cubic form on the site. The question was raised was that, okay, a lot of the concepts were arrived from our research from the Islamic world, but how can this building relate to the site and how does it relate to London? And through our survey, we found that the London cityscape was largely kind of organized around 2 types of building materials. The more kind of utilitarian and everyday buildings were actually constructed in brick, but the buildings of nobility were clad in limestone. And although King's Cross was known for its industrial heritage, upon a very close view, you see kind of pieces of limestone very selectively used in some of the buildings, in the industrial buildings at King's Cross. And in walking London, we all know the famous Regent Street or Portland Street, which were environments created by the Crown. These buildings were clad in this noble material of Portland limestone, coming from the Isle of Portland, south of UK. The buildings at King's Cross, which kind of selectively used limestone, were from Ancaster, north of London. But we found that both stones were actually becoming quite rare. The quarries were not producing as much as in the past, and from the source, the acquisition was seemed to be quite challenging. So we expanded our search beyond the local limestone in the UK and found ourselves actually in Spain, in the region of Andalusia. And we came upon this stone called Calissa Capri, which is found in quarries in the Andalusia region. And you would find this stone actually used in Cordoba and Alhambra, which was the center of the Muslim civilization at the time. And although the quarry in which the stone for the Aga Khan Centre was acquired was from Alicante, it is all from this kind of region in Spain that we thought we would use for the building, to use a noble material in a very kind of democratic way. So you can see from this finished image, the surrounding buildings are in brick and in this kind of brown, black, and kind of red hue. And the building kind of stands out as kind of a very white building for the Center of Culture and Education. And it's based on a tripartite composition with base, body, and crown. And you can see the gardens kind of chiseled on every side of the building and actually at the top of the building. When one enters, one finds itself on the ground floor and a grand kind of stairway leading up to the first story. And on the first story is a 9-story atrium, which reaches toward the sky. And this was similar to the patio that we found in the madrasa, organizing the series of courtyards, but in this case, we had a stepping series of courtyards and terraces up to the sky. And also this becomes the heart of the institution. And as Matt had introduced, there are 3 institutions of the building, but it's actually seen as one big kind of house that is centered around this living room. It's celebrated by a wonderful sculpture by a Pakistani artist, Rashid Areen, who's based in the UK, and he has done his life work trying to bridge modern minimalism with the geometric history of Islamic culture. And this is such an apt piece within the center of the building that kind of is actually, I think, a symbol of pluralism as well. On the first story, which organizes all of the kind of classrooms and the social spaces, is the first garden called the Garden of Tranquility, which was modeled after the Egyptian courtyard called the Makad, which always is north facing, and it has a very kind of decorative ceiling and decorative balusters. And this was our modern version, which actually faces north, overlooking another garden, which is currently in construction at the site. The baluster, as you saw from the previous photograph, is very decorative. And we did a modern version of that, and we've actually laser cut strips of stainless steel you see on the right in a zigzag form, and that was organized orthogonally and diagonally. And when you take 4 of these strips and you put it in a jig and you overlap them, you get this kind of pattern of orthogonal and diagonal. And when you juxtapose that, you get this unique kind of pattern, which is the 6-pointed star, which was the motif for the building. And that was translated into a stainless steel baluster for the gardens in the project. At the top of the building, we have a courtyard which is inspired by the gardens of Andalusia. And this one is completely hidden from the exterior with a 4-meter high screen, also inspired by the traditional Jali. And on the screen are poetry panels, which are verses from the Quran with magnolia trees in the center. This was designed by Nelson Bird Waltz with our collaboration. And the biggest garden in the building is this was a garden inspired by the Mughal gardens of India, with a chadar, which is a waterfall you see in white Indian marble, with a runnel down the center, reminding us of the kind of agricultural aspect of Islamic gardens of the region. And we have botanicals and flowering vegetation, which reaches up toward the sky at the top of the building. And the last garden is associated with what we were calling the crown room, which you saw from the exterior photo at the very top of the building. And it's a very celebratory room that is shared by all of the institutions for meetings and events. And toward the south is a very large terrace which overlooks garden. And when one comes out onto it, this space is called the Talar, which is a ceremonial garden, which oftentimes the imam addresses his congregation. And although this one overlooks London as this very ceremonial room creates kind of an association with the London skyline. And we had a view corridor to St. Paul's that you can see on the right. So from the space, you have kind of a panoramic sequence overlooking London, as His Highness was talking about, from a very kind of privileged space at the top of the building. So in its composition at night, it's almost kind of like a beacon on the square and on the park. So I'd like to make some closing statements about the 3 projects that you see here, that each individual one has a different function in a different location, and we had its own unique kind of collaborative team on each project, but perhaps you had probably seen some continuation and evolution of themes from project to project, which kind of constitutes our 16-year journey as Japanese architects learning about Muslim culture to create these very unique kind of projects in these 3 different cities. And we are a great fan of a scholar and sociologist from the UK. I think now he's a professor at Columbia, Richard Sennett. And I'd like to close quoting him, which I thought was very apt to this kind of theme of pluralism and how it relates to architecture. And I think what bonds those two ideas is this concept of craftsmanship. And Professor Sennett states that craftsmanship is at the heart of every great work of architecture. Unlimited by geographic or temporal bounds, the commitment to quality inherent in this notion is as applicable today as it was hundreds of years ago. Regardless of method, material, or scale, the value placed on well-crafted construction still guides design decisions and fabrication. Collaborative efforts and careful attention down to the details yield higher quality buildings that enrich the expression of architecture and its experiences. So I think our kind of survey and inspiration from Muslim culture, which I think His Highness inspired in the letters he has written us, has taken us back 500 years ago to the exercise of creating buildings in these modern times in this past 16 years. And I think as Professor Sennett mentions, I think that through all of our collaborators from 21 different nations, and I think over 1,000 people from builders to craftsmen to collaborating architects and engineers who have contributed to these very special projects. We believe that this idea of pluralism is very apt and one that continues to evolve into the future. That ends my presentation. And again, I thank Matt, Victoria at the Aga Khan Design Network for this opportunity and all who have contributed to these three special projects. Thank you.
Gary, thank you very, very much indeed. It was beautiful to revisit projects. And I think just picking up on your last point about craftsmanship, next year when everyone can visit the buildings, I think, of course, what doesn't come across in images is the craft, not just in the physical details, but the incredible craft in the way light is used, light and shadow is used. And also something that doesn't get talked about so much, the craft of how the acoustics of the building have been incredibly carefully considered, and the sense of calm going into the building, which again in contemporary buildings is quite rare. And I think it's just demonstrates your Maki Associates' particular approach to thinking about every single detail and to working with those collaborators that can help achieve a very particular approach to everything from built details to how we hear, exactly how we see things and how we experience the space. So they really are quite remarkable buildings and do need to be visited in the flesh to really experience them. There's been a short film made about the Aga Khan Centre, and this has been made by Open House, and it will be, I think, launched today on the Open House website. So if you'd like to experience more of the building in a three-dimensional sense, please do visit that. And of course, on the other websites of the Aga Khan Development Network, including the Aga Khan Centre websites, there are a number of other films, including films specifically about the gardens, which have a lot more commentary from Gary and from the design team. So it was fantastic to have everyone here today, with enormous thanks to Gary for joining us today from Tokyo. And thank you very much, everybody.